Hello and welcome again to tonight's live stream talk from the boat of Dalton up here in the Highlands. It's great to have you with us. We've had some great talks already during this season, and they've covered various ways of transport, including walking and climbing. We've had mountain biking on thin and fat tires, and we've had kayaking. So it's only fitting that tonight we extend this theme and we venture out on motorcycles. But tonight's no ordinary journey. The journey we're going to hear about took over 3 months and covered well over 9,000 miles and goes from the very south of South America to the very north of North America. So I'm really delighted to introduce our speaker, Steve Mason. Now, Steve lives in Lenzie, near Glasgow, with his wife, Amber, and his background as an IT consultant with a lifetime of passion for motorcycles and road trips. But now he's retired, he's got more time to indulge in these twin passions. So a massive thanks to you, Steve, for offering to share your experiences with us this evening, taking us through the llamas, bananas, and bears that you encountered on your journey through the Americas. For those of you who are watching tonight, please do remember to post comments up on the comments board so we can have a Q&A session at the end, usually a really good part of the evening's entertainment. But now it's time for me to disappear from the screen and hand you across to Steve, who's going to take us through the Americas on his wonderful road trip. So welcome, Steve. Thanks a lot. And the screen's all yours.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, hopefully you can hear me now. So let me go back here, and the introduction again, sorry, is so I'm going to be talking tonight about a motorcycle journey that I made from Argentina to Alaska, around with a couple of friends, and that being Wilson Hutchison and Raymond Dalton. So Raymond I met first of all when he visited a neighbour of mine in my house. And I spotted this beautiful little Suzuki GT185 outside. I was only 17. I loved bikes. I desperately run out to look at it, and Raymond come running out thinking I was looking to steal it or damage it. But from then on, we became great friends. And both Raymond and I worked in the retail trade. I worked in a menswear shop, and Raymond worked in a carpet shop, actually. And we both got a great opportunity to join company, Digital Equipment Corporation, who started making computers in Ayr, Scotland. And it was there we met a few other bikers, and one of them being Wilson Hutchison. And to be honest, we spent a couple of 2 to 3 years all running around together on our bikes and doing different things and having a great time. But as normal life takes place, we started to meet our partners, get more interested in our careers, and we then kind of just drifted apart. This is an old photo of us. That was us at the TT in 1980, and that was probably the kind of last big trip we made together. There was 6 of us out at the TT, and this is us getting back together in 2015. And the way that we got ourselves back together was just through a sheer coincidences. Raymond was living in Sydney, Australia at that time, and still is. And Wilson at that time was living in Zurich in Switzerland, and there was just some connections between friends, and we all got together through email, and we actually arranged a trip to Phoenix, Arizona, where we all went on a 1-week motorcycle holiday, and that was around about 2011. So when we all met in Arizona, it was for the first time in like over 30 years. So it was, and everything was just as it was before. We had a great time. So there was various trips and meetings and stuff going on between some of us and all of us over the next little while, until eventually we got to the idea for this trip. Now, the idea for this trip was basically Wilson was still, again, living in Zurich, and he had a business trip to Glasgow, and he messaged me saying, would you like to meet up for a beer? And which I said, yeah, I was available, and I went into Queen Street and met Wilson, and we ended up meeting at Queen Street and walking out to the Horseshoe Bar and having a few beers. And there was nothing staged, nothing pre-planned, but we were both just totally immersed in talking about our travel and our bikes and all the rest of it. And I said to him, I said, hey, why don't we, after a few pints, I must add, why don't we ride around the world? And Wilson said, yeah, he says, he says, I've looked at what they call the Pan American Highway from Argentina to Alaska. He says, I'd love to do that. And I thought, no, that's a fair compromise. That's a good one. So we clinked glasses, shook hands, and that was it. We were going. And I think that the big thing about it is that our wives didn't know. We were both working. He was in Zurich. I was traveling 5 days a week to work, and we'd no plans, but we'd made a decision that we were going, and I think that's the best way to do it. A couple of days later, I said, "Hey, maybe Raymond would be interested," and again, he's in Sydney working. So I messaged him, said, "How do you fancy it?" And the next morning he replied, and he says, "Yeah, I'd love to go." So that was the way it happened, and I think maybe that's the way you've got to do these big things. You decide, and then you work out all the stuff around it. So I think, as far as the route is concerned, I think the other two guys wouldn't argue that I was the planner of the three. So I get really deeply into routes, countries, methods of transport, getting the bikes there and stuff like that. And this is the route here, which I love to see it in the globe, because it just shows you the scale of it. It ended up being over 23,000 miles, and we covered 15 countries, 2 continents. We were looking at the Southern Cross star in the south of the continent, southern hemisphere, and looking at the Northern Star up in Alaska. So it was an incredible journey. And it wasn't even really just south to north, because there's the dogleg there at the top, the bottom, where we were going from Buenos Aires down to Ushuaia and Tierra del Fuego, which is the bottom of South America. And that particular route itself is 1,900 miles. So that's like traveling from Glasgow to Moscow by motorcycle just to get to the start. So it was a big journey, but a fantastic journey. So the departure was actually, it turned out to be February the 2nd. We were wanting to get away there as the end of the summer, the beginning of winter down in the southern hemisphere, and then that would get us up to spring in the Alaska area and the US area, so we could kind of get the best of the weather. The duration was going to be 3 months, but turned out to be 4.5. After a bit of planning, we decided that it was going to be a real rush to do it in 3 months, so we moved on and did it in 4.5 months, a bit more time. And with that, we were able to meet our wives for a week in LA, so they got something out of the trip as well.
Hi. So if I can just butt in, Steve. Sorry, your slides are not on full screen at the moment. I just wonder if you could find down that's the one. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, I'm away again. Bye.
Okay, so then the bikes, we got a company. I found a company called Motor Freight who were really brilliant, and the plan was that we would fly the bikes to Buenos Aires. I mean, for that length of time, you could never hire bikes. It's complicated to buy bikes and then sell them in different countries. So that was the only sensible option. And Motor Freight were brilliant. And the accommodation was camping, hostels and hotels. That was the plan, and that's the way it worked out, just a bit of everything depending on what was going on. You can see the countries there, 15 countries. We did some fundraising for Deafblind Scotland, and we were asked at a presentation before that what we thought was the most dangerous country. And at that time we thought Mexico, but well, you'll see how it turned out. The places are never as bad as you think. And the other thing we did was the bikes themselves. So I had a 2009 BMW R1200 GS that I'd done a fair amount of kind of more long distance stuff on, and it's kitted up and it was perfect for the journey as far as I was concerned. Wilson didn't have an adventure style bike, so he bought this. This was a new 2014 motorcycle. It's a BMW GSA, and the difference between an A and a GS is it's got a bigger fuel tank, a bigger front wheel, which is kind of better for off-road, and it's got more protection as standard, but very, very similar. So, but Wilson bought his name was Ludwig, after the king in Munich, where he stayed at one time. Raymond was an interesting one because after I did my research on getting the bikes to Buenos Aires, one of the huge risks were that if we tried to merge getting 2 bikes from Scotland and 1 bike from Australia, the timing might go all wrong. So we kind of advised Raymond you'd be better buying a bike. He didn't have an adventure bike. You'd be better buying a bike in Scotland, or we'll buy you a bike with your money and fly it with our 2 bikes, which he agreed to, which was great. So it's quite funny because we were looking for a bike for him. We eventually found one. We got invited to a showroom. We were looking at the bike and we FaceTimed Raymond, who happened to be coming back out from a boozy works night out in Sydney, and he was on his phone, and he agreed to buy this bike that we showed him on his phone in a taxi coming back from a works night out. But thankfully, he was very pleased with it when he got it. So that was a bit of the preparation. The other preparation was none of us had done any off-road riding, and that we knew that there was mainly gravel and some dirt down in the south extreme of the continents and the north extreme of the continents, so effectively Argentina, Chile, a bit of Alaska, and then just a little bit in between. So we went to this off-road training, which was up in Inverary, run by a guy called Clive Rumbold, called Motor Scotland. So we went 2 or 3 times, and Clive was brilliant, and it just helped prepare us for what was coming. Sadly, they are no longer operating, but it was really, really good. I googled looking for some kind of medical training, like first aid training, not medical training, and found this company called Venture Medical, which is run by a guy called Craig Bothwick. Craig's like a real live action man who was an ex-police armed response unit guy. He's recently saw him in FaceTime that he's been working in some of the dangerous areas of Mexico in accident and emergency. And they normally focus on mountain rescue type medical help, but he took us for a day free of charge and just gave us proper real life first aid training, which thankfully we kind of didn't really need to use much, but it was great. Douglas Pat, BMW Motorrad, who were in East Kilbride at that time and are now in Glasgow, they helped us by giving us a couple of sets of tyres and a few spares. But the main thing that they did was they let us spend a couple of days technical training with their chief mechanic, Stevie Cowan. And we just had 2 days of fun because Stevie couldn't believe how bad we were at mechanics. But he really helped us to the best of his ability, I would say. So we enjoyed that. And as far as technology and social media, we had GoPro helmet cameras. GoPros are great devices, but we found very quickly, unless you've got a big support network, you either a trip of this length, you're going to concentrate on filming it, or you're going to concentrate on being in the trip. And we chose the latter. So there's no movie tonight, which is probably a good thing after my technical start. But there is, there's plenty of photos, and so we just focused on photography. We had Scala riders, rider-to-rider communication, which proved really invaluable. They were great. They don't cover a big, large distance, but if you're in La Paz in Bolivia or Lima in Peru, going through bedlam traffic, and you're trying to hold on to each other or barking at each other, we're going to take the next junction, and then they really come into their own. They were also used in other kind of problematic situations that I'll talk about. Facebook, we used a Facebook group. I'll tell you about that at the end. So there's regular updates and photos on that Facebook group. And we had a spot tracker. The spot tracker was, I think, mainly an insurance policy for our wives, that we could press an emergency button and the satellite would pick it up and somebody would come and help us. But ironically, it's a tracker, and we lost the tracker in Bolivia. So we spent most of the trip without it. We couldn't track it down once we'd lost it. So it came to February the 2nd, and it was time to fly. And you can see us there at Glasgow Airport in very, very clean motorcycle suits and ready to go. And by the magic of flights, we were in Argentina probably 18 hours later, and the next morning at 9 o'clock, we were along at the airport to clear our bikes. Again, Motor Freight had set us up with a fixer, We had a lady called Sandra who came with us and did all the talking, obviously in Spanish, and helped get the bikes, the crates through, and helped us organise getting them uncrated and out of the airport. And the picture on the right is the Raymond seen his bike for the first time, which thankfully he was very happy with. So we then spent a day in Buenos Aires just putting parts onto basically mainly Raymond's bike. Raymond flew to Scotland first of all and spent some time with his relatives, and while he was there his bike was in transit back to Argentina, so he bought some stuff like extra protection and fuel cans, etc. So we prepared that, and we were then ready to move off and head south. So Sandra had told us about this place where we stayed the first night, and this was a guy who just loves adventure travellers and welcomes them into his house, and you can camp in his garden. You know, it's quite cool with the big mural of John Lennon, etc., and just a really good guy. And it was there that we did our first dollar exchange in Argentina, because Argentina had an issue at that time where you were getting double the dollar exchange rate when you were dealing with someone in the street from going to a bank or a cash machine. So it was almost like just nobody was going to banks or cash machines. And thankfully, Polo's daughter was looking to exchange quite a bit of money, so we exchanged it there. But it was always something in Argentina where you were always wondering where you're going to get your next safe set of cash exchange. And we headed down through Argentina, so it's down basically the east coast, I guess. It's the east coast, and it's fairly flat, fairly fertile farmland, just kind of small hills, but very pleasant country, good roads. You can see the cops stopped us there, but mainly for selfies. They were pretty decent. And we did a bit of camping and a bit of hotels on the way down. The picture to the top right is a picture of wind warning. There's a famous thing called the Patagonia wind down in Patagonia, which is ferocious winds that blow across the whole area, and they can be really dangerous. And what we did was we found ourselves, you'd find yourself leaning at a very acute angle on the bike just to go in a straight line at times. And if there was any hills or anything that you're going to come up against or bankings, suddenly the bike would be dropping away from you. So it was very challenging, but we were lucky we had quite big, heavy bikes. And in that case, it was a good thing. We met a couple of Australians who'd been blown right off the road as we headed further south on lighter bikes. But it was an experience. So we went down through Argentina, and then before we got to the ferry area for the island of Terra del Fuego, which is the land of fire because it was very ex-volcanic, it's very mountainous. We did our first border crossing into Chile, and that worked out really well. And then got a ferry in across and headed down through that area into Ushuaia. So you can see there we're at the very bottom of the continent. Ushuaia is where the supply boats go to Antarctica. I think there's some cruise ships now go to Antarctica from there. So it's as south as you can go in the mainland. And we turned around and got ready to head up north. So heading north, this is what I call a sheep jam. We came across this, and there was sheep, a flock of sheep for further than the eye could see, and it was very flat land, so it was a very long way. And we kind of just parked the bikes and got off, and weren't quite sure what to do. And of course, we're being a bit dumb because a pickup truck just come along behind us, and all you do is you drive into them, and they park just like the Red Sea. But we didn't know that, but it was certainly the biggest flock of sheep I've ever seen in my life. But that was the kind of flatlands at the north of Tierra del Fuego. This is an interesting sign, and we're now in mainland Chile and still heading north. And this basically says the road to the end of the world, Ruta del Fin del Mundo. So I think it's a really cool sign, and happy to take a picture of that one. And then we started to get further north and hit the bottom of the Andes. And this is it's a very famous area. The people that are into their climbing and hill walking will probably know this area. So this is Torres del Paine in Chile. and those stacks are often used by climbers. And again, very beautiful, good gravel roads and camping with a view in that case. We're just camping right next to where the bikes are parked here. We then moved back into Argentina, and we moved from Argentina to Chile quite a lot, and crossed the Andes a few times. And in this case, we're on Ruta 40. Now, Ruta 40 is a kind of famous one for adventure motorbikers or overlanders. It was a gravel road that ran from the very south to the very north. It's now still quite a bit of gravel, but they're starting to tarmac it. So there was some tarmac. And then there's the in-between stuff, which is always the worst stuff, which is they're tarmacking the gravel, so they're kind of sending you off in the dirt. You can see there that there's a llama circle, just to let you know the title of Llamas, Bananas and Bears. We've seen quite a few llamas on the route. But yeah, this is us heading up the famous Ruta 40. And I talked about the in-between stuff. This is Wilson coming in the in-between stuff. It doesn't look too bad, but when it was wet, it was very, very slippy stuff. And to the left, you'll see where they're actually building the road. It never gave us any real problems, but you were aware it was quite tricky, quite slippy. So again, we as I said, we moved all the Andes a few times. For me, this is the most difficult one. So this was just beyond Mendoza, where they make the Malbec red wine. We'd spent a couple of days in Mendoza chilling and drinking Malbec red wine, and then we headed up, and we were making our way across to Chile again, and we come onto this Ruta 41. And I think we kind of assumed it was a relatively short route, but it turned out it was well over 100 miles. It was gravel and some dirt, but not too bad. But what we found was we reached a height of 15,698 feet, which, if you think of it, that's you at more than 3.5 times the height of Ben Nevis, or 5 times the height of Monroe's on a motorbike. So it was quite we were seriously high, and you could feel it in your lungs. We all coped with the altitude fairly well, but you could feel it. You could feel that something different was going on. But I mean, the bikes performed really well. And then the next problem was, because we had underestimated the distance, it started to get dark, and we were going downhill, and my brake failure light came on, which turned out to be an ABS failure, which is not a bad thing in gravel, but I didn't know that. And the gravel started to get quite marblery, so that it was like little marbles. And there was big drops. So it was quite a tense drop down into the valley, and I was really glad to get to the border post in a tarmac road again. I'll never forget Ruta 41. From there, we were back into Chile again, and a famous road in Chile is the Carretera Austral. Again, a mixture was all at one stage gravel, but there's gravel, as you can see there, that's be hidden at the distance, and there's again the dirt roadworks, and there's a bit of tarmac, not so much in that one. But again, it's very Tyrol type scenery, so it's Alps type scenery in that one. It's lots of trees and mountains and lakes. It was beautiful, a beautiful road to ride. And this was on that particular road. We had spotted that they were going to close the road at something like, say, 1 o'clock for 4 hours. So we're desperate to get to the bit where they were going to close it before 1 o'clock. And we arrived at 1 minute past 1, absolutely 1 minute past 1. And this little lady was probably about 4'8" or something, or 4'9". And there's nothing we could say that would allow us let us through. We're really just saying, let us go. 1 minute, let us go. We're on motorbikes. We're going to, but she wouldn't let us go. So we kind of had to just laugh and say, okay, that's it. So we get packed up and made her a cup of tea and just chilled for 4 hours talking to the other people in the traffic jam. But that's part of the journey. It was good fun in the end. So from there, we headed up through Chile, and eventually in the north of Chile is the Atacama Desert. So the Atacama Desert is the driest place in the world, driest desert, sorry, in the world. And they've got this great big this concrete hand that you'll see an awful lot of travellers stopping at to get their photo taken, which is quite understandable. Again, the Deafblind Scotland thing up on the right-hand side is we carried the Deafblind Scotland banner for them I think in the end we raised about £8,000 for Deafblind Scotland. But yeah, so this is us at the Atacama Desert. Sometimes you're lucky with timing and sometimes you're unlucky. In this case, we were lucky because 19 days after this, there was the fiercest floods and storms that they'd seen in centuries. And there was 30 people killed and 30,000 people, and there's not a lot of houses there, I can tell you, were moved out of their homes. So we were quite lucky that we were there before any of that started happening. So at the Atacama is quite north in Chile, and we are now entering Bolivia. And I would say that Chile and Argentina, there's definitely remote places, but it's relatively westernized. Bolivia and Peru were not, and we kind of knew that coming into Bolivia. So we're quite nervous excited about it. But yeah, it was good to get into Bolivia. And this was the border crossing. And anonymously, you'll see that big kind of cloud in the back of us there. We had another high mountain crossing to do here. And we faced, we don't have pictures because it was too hard, but we faced the biggest storm that we faced in the trip was going over this mountain pass. We were being chased by the blackest clouds that I've ever seen. There was thunder and lightning striking just down all around us. And eventually we came across what had been a deluge of, I think it was hail. It was a porridge-coloured, fawn-coloured hail that engulfed the road and was slipping off the side of the mountain into the abyss, basically. And we were riding through this with the darkness and the lightning, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. But we didn't stop to take pictures. We come back out of it, and eventually we made our destination safely. And I've been trying to pronounce this all week, but Uyuni, I think it is a town where the famous salt flats exist in Bolivia, and these are the biggest salt flats in the world, which is just miles of flat, rideable crust, and you can ride into it that far that you lose sight of any of the mountains, and people have died, people have perished in there because they've got completely lost. But it's these type of salt flats, like in Bonneville in the USA, they do their speed records on. So we didn't ride too fast, but you could ride at a fair amount of speed. The first priority after this was to go and get us and the bikes power washed to save them from rust. So I talk about timing. So we were now heading north in Bolivia, and Wilson was in front, I was in the middle, and Raymond was at the back, and we're all banking round a corner, and we seen quite a kind of biggish rock coming rolling towards us. And the rolling rock came to me, and I had nowhere to go, so it bashed into my wheel, it bashed my rim, but instantly put a big hole in my tyre. So thankfully I didn't fall off. I pulled over to the side, and that was me waiting, and the guys going to try and rescue me with a fixed tyre or a new tyre. They were able to find a guy who mainly did bicycles, but somehow he had this kind of motocross tyre. So they come back with my wheel, really pleased with themselves. And Wilson was delightfully calling it, "I've got you a rally chopper tyre." It was a tyre with a tube on a tubeless wheel rim, which is the right thing, first of all. It was the wrong size, although he'd managed to fit it on. It was made in China, and it was nylon, and it was motocross. It was really, really, really unsuitable for the next 1,500 miles, but I was really grateful for it, and it got me there in the end. So yeah, the rally chopper tyre did me good. So we kept on moving, and we're getting to the edge of Bolivia now. We went through like the major cities of La Paz and stuff like that, which were all frantic and crazy with traffic, and just some beautiful places in Bolivia. An awful lot at major high altitude. We're often above 10,000 feet for most of the time in Bolivia. But there's this ferry which crosses Lake Titicaca, and Lake Titicaca is the highest navigatable body of water in the world. So it's effectively 5 times the size of Lake Geneva. So it's a big lake, and it's up at nearly Monroe height. And the ferry is, as you can see, is an interesting one. We were all quite kind of holding on to ourselves in the bikes as it crossed over, especially Wilson, because you can see him next to the bus there. He couldn't, the angle wouldn't let him get his side stand down, so he couldn't stop off, get off the bike and hold on to it. He just to balance it, and that bus and the rocking of the water was starting to bounce back towards him. So he was glad, more glad than any of us to get off that ferry. But another interesting experience. And over we went, stayed the night in Copacabana, where the music comes from, and we then headed over the border, which was just next to Copacabana, into Peru, which was another beautiful country. You know, it's just the dress of the people and all the rest of it was great. And I should say everybody was friendly in every country most of the way. So just enjoyed Peru. And the photo on the right hand side is a thing that happened to us quite a lot. When you get a little bed and breakfast like this, you need to get the bikes in off the road because the guy the owner didn't deem them safe to stay there. So in this case, like, we would put a ramp up onto his front door, we'd move the dining table, and then we put his bikes out into the conservatory. I mean, I don't think you'd see that happening in many Scottish hotels. So, but it was just kind of what you did then. So as we moved up through Peru, we got to Cusco. So Cusco is the one of the setting off places for Machu Picchu, which is the famous Inca site, a famous site in the hills. And we had thought about this as we were coming up, and we'd read about it, and it was going to be about $350 each. We had to get a train there because it was going to be pretty hard to get there on the bikes. It was going to be swarming with tourists. So we decided, well, we're kind of no really in that big a tourist trail, so we'll just keep going. So I spent the day in Cusco servicing Boris, and the guy spent the day in Cusco looking around, and it was a nice city. So we missed Machu Picchu, but I've no regrets. So we were then heading over towards Lima, Peru, and thankfully I was going to get this front tyre changed. And it was another Andes crossing. And to start with, we saw a couple of rocks in the road, which, as you know, from the rolling rock that I just mentioned, wasn't that unusual. We at one point we passed a rock the size of a car at one time that had rolled onto the road. But as we started to see this take place, we knew that things were changing and that there was a demonstration, a protest going on. So we ended up coming into a village, and we were kind of not forcibly, but kind of encouraged to stop. And we stopped, and this is where the Scala riders came in really well. We ended up talking to each other and thinking, okay, so we're not doing any good stopping here. There's nothing that we can do. So we thought, right, we're just going to go for it. So we just moved on, and there was a half-hearted effort to stop us. Somebody threw a piece of wood in front of Raymond's bike, but it really wasn't even kind of malicious. They were almost like apologetic in doing it. So we get out of there, away from the rocks, and we thought, oh, that's great. We're flying now. We're good. Crossed another pass, a mountain pass, and come down, and we saw a great big town in front of us, and the rocks started appearing again. And we thought, this is okay, talking again to each other, thinking this is probably not great. And it became a lot more kind of aggressive because we had young guys, all in the back of pickup trucks with sticks and stuff, and they're all shouting at us. There was bumped out cars in the street, there was tyres, there was whatever, and we thought, right, okay, our plan was we keep going till we're physically stopped, as in forcibly stopped. And we weaved our way through this town, which was, it was interesting. And out the other side, and again the rocks disappeared, and we thought, right, that has got to be it. And obviously 2 miles later we come across a great big traffic jam, and there's the perfect ambush spot where there's a big cliff on one side and a raging river on the other, and then there's just a big mob of people and guys on megaphones all talking about the complaints that they were having at that time. So that was us kind of stuck. So just after we pulled over, there's a truck driver kind of motioned to us. He says, you're going to be all right. He was saying it in Spanish, and we're kind of getting what he was saying, just go. So foolishly, we believed him. We thought, we'll just go for it. So we went up towards this crowd, and the crowd started running at us with sticks. So you've never seen 3 bikes do a U-turn quicker in your life. We are smile and a wave, and we're back down again. So we kind of got the story that from a very panicky Dutch guy that they'd been there the night before. The youths and the guys had all been quite aggressive, and we were in deep trouble because we were in motorbikes and we'd have no protection. And he was phoning the embassy, and we should phone our embassy, etc., etc. But while he was doing that, a little Argentinian lady come up who spoke English and said, "Hey, look, you guys are riding for charity and that. They'll let you through. Let's go and see the boss." So I thought, okay, so we've just been up to the bay and crowd and kind of come back down, and now we're going to walk up to the bay and crowd, and we're going to ask to speak to the guy on the megaphone. So it was like, okay, we'll come with you. So reluctantly, we headed up with her, and she actually got the leader to come off his megaphone and came and talked to us. And to be honest, he was quite nice, and he said, "Hey, just don't worry, go back." And what happened was we went back, and half an hour later they let everybody go. So we moved on. But it was a great experience, quite nerve wracking. But yeah, I'm glad we had it. That's what adventures are made of, as I would say. So we got to Lima, Peru. So I'd done 1,500 miles in my tyre, and I got it changed to a proper tyre, which was a great relief to me. We stayed in Lima, Peru. Again, another manic, crazy city traffic-wise, but there were, as you can see, there were some nice bits of it. The picture on the left is Wilson had a passion for this Inca Cola, which is basically like Scottish Iron Brew or American Coca-Cola. I mean, it's completely rancid stuff. I have no idea what he was thinking of, but he loved it. And that's Raymond looking sophisticated in a park in Lima. So from Lima, it was we're heading north and going through quite a desert area of Peru, and got ourselves into Ecuador. And there was quite a few of these situations, but quite often, if you move from one border to the other, the change in the landscape was like mind blowing. So you effectively we come into the wee border crossing from Peru and what was like total desert, and we come out of the Ecuador side and what was completely farmed and green, and there's the bananas for llamas and bananas and bears. It was like a mind-blowing change in the landscape. And the first thing we did in Ecuador was go find a little beach village, and we had a couple of days there, and that's Wilson, through the power of FaceTime, talking to his dad, his 8-year-old dad back home. So we had a good couple of days chilling in Ecuador, and then we started. Now, Ecuador itself, that's just as an example of what it was like every time you stopped in a village anywhere in South America and Central America. I mean, it was like, for the first time, we felt like some kind of pop stars or something, because everybody wanted selfies with us. Everybody was friendly. Everybody wanted to sit in our bikes and get pictures taken. So it was really nice. It's a good feeling, a nice feeling. And we clearly passed the equator, the central point of the world, the equator, in a very kind of non-touristy area, because in front of Raymond there's that little sign. We actually missed it and had to ride back looking for it based on the sat navs. But that was all there was. There was no like visitor centre or anything to say, or even a line in the road to say you're now crossing the equator. But that was out of the continent of South America, and we're now in North America. So we were making progress. So from Ecuador, we rode up through the capital and then over into Colombia. And Colombia's got a ring to it, hasn't it? That makes you think about, obviously, the drug cartels, etc. But it was a stunningly beautiful country, and probably one I'd like to spend more time in. A lot of mountains, a lot of greenery. And yeah, we did spend time in the big drug cartel areas. So we'd spent a night in Cali, and we spent a couple of nights in Medellin, and there was a sense of tension of the past was there, but there wasn't it's maybe stupid to say, but there wasn't a tension of the present. It just felt as if people were more relaxed, and yeah, we really enjoyed Colombia. This young soldier pulled us over further north, and really just wanted to talk to us and get selfies with us and stuff like that. And again, this is one of those good time and bad timing things, because in that very area, that very part, 9 days later, there was a FARC attack on the soldiers, and there was 10 of them killed. So you always reflect and wonder. That there's still stuff going on there when you see that, and you wonder and hope that the young guy survived that. So we got to Cartagena in Colombia, another good narcos place, but beautiful place, felt totally safe. And this is where we would have to cross the ocean. There is a land bridge all the way from Argentina to Alaska, but there's a little bit in it that some people will be aware of called the Darien Gap. It's about 80 to 100 miles of roadless jungle, just rivers and trees, and quite a lot of bandit activity in there. And maybe 2 or 3 or 4 motorcyclists have passed through it, but doing that as an adventure alone, because you need Land Rovers, you need pulleys, you need canoes, you need guides. So nobody doing this type of trip as a standard would do that. Normally what they would either do is use a private yacht that some people hire out, or most people would fly them, I think. But we were really lucky because there's a ferry, just like a North Sea ferry from, like Amsterdam to Newcastle, was running, and it failed very quickly, but it ran for about 8 months, and we booked it, and we knew it was failing as we were reaching here, and it was only, I think, a couple of weeks after this that it went out of business. But we managed to get that ferry to get us over to Panama. And the two guys on the right are, the one at the back is Ricardo, a Panamanian, and the one at the front is German Herman, who is from El Salvador but was living in Miami. They were guys that we kind of befriended at the dock. Herman's a protester by nature, so when we pulled up in the blazing heat, ready to go into this boat that was about to go out of business, he wanted us to join in a protest where we wouldn't pay to get our bikes washed and or decontaminate it. And we thought, no, Herman, no way. So it was a bad start to our relationship, but it blossomed, and you'll hear more about him. So we got the ferry across, and we landed in Panama. The customs clearance in Panama was really tough, and it was about 4 hours. In fact, Ricardo, the Panamanian, was a lovely guy, and he waited with us while we eventually got ourselves cleared and got our bikes, allowed us to ride into Panama. Part of that clearance is that you had to legally buy insurance, which we would have done anyway, for Panama, to ride into Panama, but it turns out that the Duke doesn't that one, and although we bought insurance, we never get any insurance documents. The reason the 7th President of the Americas photo is up here, because that came into it, because when we landed in Panama that night, it was dark. We went in and we stayed in Panama City itself, and we had a great plan, an exciting plan for Panama, because Wilson had knew a friend in Zurich who the family were Panamanian, and they owned a beach house just maybe about 70 miles north of Panama City. And at that point, his son and his nephew and another American guy were living in the beach house, but they said that it was a big beach house, we could go and live in it and stay there as long as we wanted. So we'd always planned to chill there for 4 or 5 days. So we're quite excited about chilling there. So we stayed in the hotel that night. We then went to meet the guys. They were running a Polaris dealership in Panama City. We met the guys, and we were following them to this beach house. So the traffic in Panama City was chaotic because of the presidents, because they were ferrying the president convoys back and forward. So they were stopping roads and then letting us go and doing stuff. So we eventually got to the Bridge of the Americas, which crosses the Panama Canal. And the plan was to get in and take a photo of the Bridge of Americas. There's a little pull-in bit just over the bridge. So we all pulled in there, and whenever we went in there, we were set upon effectively by guys with guns who were security guys, and the place was effectively not open. So they were, just pushing the guns into us, telling us to get back on the highway really, really aggressively. And in a timing thing, sadly, I was the last one to be in the row coming out. So as I come out, I could caught a minibus in my mirror that was coming at a breakneck speed. And sadly, he clipped my panniers and knocked me flying. And the bike, I think the bike bounced on one side, then the other side, and then bounced on that side. I could tell all of that because of the damage to it. And very quickly, a cop, as you can see, was on us. So the minibus turned out to be full of CIA agents for Obama. And Wilson nearly got himself into bother because he was trying to take some photos so we would have something almost like witnessy type stuff, and he was pushed away from that, and very quickly the CIA agents were all swept away, and I was left with Wilson and obviously the Spanish speaking policeman and the minibus driver who was Spanish speaking, and they clearly were of the opinion that I was to blame. I had a big problem here. So I managed to text Raymond, and Raymond managed to bring back one of the guys, Spanish-speaking guys, Diego, and that really helped us a lot. My biggest problem was they discovered we didn't have insurance, which of course we had bought, but had been conned at the border. And thankfully, Diego was a great negotiator and convinced them that my health insurance covered my bike, which of course it didn't. Because, I mean, for a good 15 minutes, the guy was going to impound my bike, arrest me. I don't know whether that meant take me away or just take the bike away, but it was looking really, really bad. But we managed to convince him, and he let me go. So I got on what was quite a bent bike, and followed the guys to the beach house that night. So I think it was a bit more in shock than anything else. So the beach house, as you can see, was very spectacular, and it would have been a brilliant place to relax if I had not been absolutely up to high dough, as they say. I was thinking, am I going to get stopped at the border going out? Because he did charge me, the guy. So I'd been charged for some traffic offence. Can I get the bike repaired? Because the bike, the handlebars were kind of slightly off centre, so that meant my front frame was bent a bit. The indicators were smashed on both sides because the bike had flipped. The headlight was smashed. The speedometer was smashed, and I was pretty sore for those couple of days. So Raymond and Wilson had a great time there, but I wanted out of Panama, to be honest. So thankfully, the American guy that was with him was a mechanic, and through my design and his fitting of the indicators, I come up with just some ideas to fix it on the road. So the smash headlight was just covered by a stone guard piece of plastic, and I just taped it all in. I used a Tupperware top for the speedometer. And the indicators, I was most proud of them because they were a cigar tube. So Raymond had a couple of cigars for special occasions, like being at a really nice villa by the sea. So we smoked a couple of cigars, and I used them. I bought some Chinese LEDs, and I used the top off of sun cream bottles to create the indicators. I mean, they were very ineffective, but they just made me feel better. And I was never going to be able to fix the bent front frame. I just had to live with that for the rest of the trip till I get back to Kirkintilla and racing and cruising. So that was it. And we moved on. We moved up out of Panama. When I got to the border, it was like the movie Midnight Express. I was absolutely nervous that they would see me on the system and they would stop me crossing the border. But thankfully, I get through the border and we get into Costa Rica, and it was a big sigh of relief. And Costa Rica's quite westernised. They get rid of their army. There's no kind of militia going around. It uses the American dollar, and their kind of life saying is "Pura vida," pure life, and it was very appropriate. And we spent a couple of days by a beach in Costa Rica, and I felt a hell of a lot better for that. So all of these Central America countries are much, much smaller. So we moved through them a lot quicker. And this was Nicaragua, which again, beautiful countries. None of them, other than Costa Rica, very westernized, but people were friendly. Again, that's more of our bikes. There was 4 big steps with a big ramp to get these bikes into this hotel foyer. And that's tobacco plantations, which were all the way up through Nicaragua. So we were basically through Nicaragua in a couple of days, and we're coming to what was we'd learned on the way up was definitely the most out of control country, the most dangerous country, and that was Honduras. Now, thankfully, Honduras again is quite a small country, and what we decided to was just based on all the advice we were getting. It was on the British websites, but it was also from the locals. they were very focused in Honduras. We'd heard that there were fake police guys and all the rest of it, that we should get through it quite quickly into, and I never thought I'd say these words, the safety of El Salvador, but that's how it felt. So thankfully it was a Sunday morning, we thought, okay, most people are going to be sleeping or in church, and we went through Honduras, and probably maybe 5 or 6 hours. We did get stopped by these cops wielding guns, but they were real cops, and they were happy to get some selfies with us. And I'm sure it is better than we thought it was at that time, but just everything was indicating to us that we should not waste any time in Honduras at that point anyway. So we reached the safety of El Salvador, and there's Herman again, who we met in Colombia at the ferry. So El Salvador was an absolute treat for us, and Herman made it a treat for us because we actually went and visited his family. That's his aunt down to the left there, who ran a market stall. We stayed with his cousin one night. We walked around his local village, went to the school. We even met the mayor of the village, and he showed us some of the darker side, because Herman, being a protester, as I said, was number 2 in the wanted list for his area during the troubled times, and he had to flee to Miami. He was head of communications, but he took us to a graveyard, and we saw the grave of his aunt that had been murdered and raped. He took us to our cousin's house, and we were eating in the back garden where the grandfather had been executed. So there was some horrible stuff going on, but the people that we came across were just extremely friendly. He also took us into San Salvador. The next night we stayed with one of his nephews, and the nephew put us 3 and Herman into the back of a pickup truck and took us on a tour of San Salvador, just sitting loose in the back of a pickup truck. But not a safe thing to do in terms of even like road safety, but just a great experience, and we'll always remember him. So from El Salvador, we're through again, small country, Guatemala, very volcanic, beautiful stuff. We've got a beautiful, quite touristy town, but beautiful, old town in Antigua, and we stayed there for a night. And yeah, just enjoyed Guatemala as well, riding through it, just enjoyed the scenery. And that was us getting quite well north now and heading into Mexico. And as I said at the beginning, Mexico, we kind of thought that seemed to be, in paper, the most kind of dangerous place. But Mexico was an absolute delight. We loved it. The place was beautiful. The roads were fantastic. The drivers were completely courteous. The people were all friendly. And the food was just the best. The food was amazing. So the ride through Mexico was brilliant. And then we got a ferry across to the Baja Peninsula, which connects into California. And again, just thoroughly enjoyed Mexico. There was one incident, and it turned out not to be an incident in Mexico, where we stopped off one night. It was getting dark. We moved into this wee village, got our bikes into a hostel compound, and went into town, and there was a bit of some kind of celebration and marching going on. And I remember we were sitting there and sitting in a corner eating the local food, and it was like one of those westerns where someone comes into the bar and everything goes quiet. It literally did. It just happened like that. The guy had, traditionally the white suit on and the black shirt and a big gold medallion, with a black moustache, and he just looked powerful, and I would imagine a drugs guy. And he came in and just looked around, looked at us, and pointed at us one by one, just 1, 2, 3, and then said, 3 beers for the gringos, and the whole thing erupted. They're all playing the music again, and everything was fine. And yeah, it made me think for a minute, but it was just found Mexico great. The picture in the top left is Hussang's, which is a famous bar up in Enchilado, and it's the home of the margarita, and that's them playing music in there. So we really enjoyed Mexico. So we finally reached America, the United States, and as I'd mentioned earlier, the plan was that we'd meet our wives there. Now Raymond couldn't meet Joyce. Wilson met Yvonne, I met Amber, but Raymond couldn't meet Joyce because of the Southern Hemisphere thing, the Australia thing. She's a teacher, and it was still term time for her. So Raymond had made a decision that rather than wait around for about 8 days in LA, he was wanting to just head off. He had some friends he met in LA, but he was wanting to head on alone. So it was a good decision for him. I don't blame him. So he headed off about halfway through that week. So we were down to 2 riders. And this is, we had a great week in LA. It was great to catch up. We chilled, and this was I managed to celebrate my birthday in LA in this restaurant. So we had a good time, and then Wilson and I met up again, ready to move on. I did get my indicators replaced in LA, so I at least had proper indicators, but I certainly couldn't, and I get my headlight replaced. I couldn't get the bike straightened though. So we moved on from LA, and now it's Wilson and I moving up the California Highway 1, so the beautiful Pacific Coastal Highway. And again, it's very relaxing to be in America. Just obviously the atmosphere there was good, and this was us on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge, moving north at some pace. And then we continued up through Oregon Highway 1, again, some beautiful coastline, and that was the big redwood trees. And we were camping at that time most of the time. The camping was much more expensive than South America, but the facilities were phenomenal. You get a picnic table, you get a barbecue grill, and you get a bear cupboard to put your food away from the bears during the night. So yeah, we really enjoyed the camping and getting up through the Americas. And finally, we got to Canada. So Canada, again, a nice easy border crossing, and you can see Vancouver there, which was a beautiful city. But we just moved through that Vancouver that day and headed north looking for a campsite just north of Vancouver. I mean, the scenery is fantastic. And we tried a couple of campsites, but we discovered it was a bank holiday, or a national holiday, I guess. And so we were struggling. So we tried a third campsite, which looked full as well. And suddenly a guy came across, a guy whose name was Kevin Chow, who was also a biker, also had a GS, and said, come in and share our spot. And it was like, we could almost not put our tents fully up. It was that tight, but it was really kind of him. And we had a great laugh that night, and a great night with him at the campfire and his 2 friends. And Kevin then went on to arrange for us to camp in his aunt's garden further north, and invited us to stay with him when we were coming back down to Vancouver. He ended up also riding down to Argentina after. I don't know whether we helped inspire him or not. I hope so, but yeah, he's done some big stuff now too. So after that night's camping, we woke up. It's a beautiful morning. It was one of the kind of scenic highways. It's called the Sea to Sun Highway, going up through British Columbia. And we were, well, I'd call it in the zone. We were feeling good. We were riding quite hard. Wilson was kind of a way ahead of me, and we were enjoying just the great road surfaces, good tyres, etc. Until we came to the Cayush Bridge. Now, why would you put a wood? I'd still say this. Why would you put a wooden bridge in a major road, which was completely and utterly slippy? I mean, it was unbelievable. And Wilson kind of slid over it way in advance of me, maybe a couple of miles in advance of me, but managed to grip the tarmac at the end by stopping, and then moved on. But unfortunately, as per usual, I didn't. So I kind of slid all the way over it, and then just lost the front end at the very end. And I went down quite hard. And I was physically okay, nothing broken or that, but I saw oil in the road, so I was really, really worried about the situation, and I thought potentially my trip was over. A guy pulled over in a car and helped me lift the bike back up, and he told me that the town Lillooet was it was about 15 miles away, was downhill all the way, so I could freewheel down, and foolishly I believed him. So I started freewheeling down, and maybe after 2 miles there was a big hill, so I switched the engine on, and I thought, okay, I'll keep my hand in the clutch. If I've got an oil light, so if that's working, it'll tell me I'm running out of oil. And I limped down into Lillooet and met Wilson. So I told him I had a catastrophic problem, I think was the words I used. So I was a bit worried. So we went and found an auto store, and I was looking for that metal, paste where you could put it on and it would harden. And I started looking for an oil leak, and I couldn't find anything. But I noticed where the spark plugs are, or where the cylinder head gasket are, there's a bit of weeping. So I decided I'd take the spark plug out, which Stevie and BMW Motorrad had taught us to do it, and it's a wee bit more complicated than normal because there's a coil over the spark plug. So I proceeded not to have listened to him properly and break the coil. So I now had a bike that was leaking oil and one cylinder deactivated. But thankfully, we managed to get the shop to phone the local mechanic, a retired mechanic who arrived in a beautiful old Indian chief. His name was Bob, and kind of looked at us in disgust and looked at the problem. And he says, "Yeah, you ain't going to fix that." He says, "You need to go back to Vancouver." But he said, "You can ride it in one cylinder." And I thought, "Can you?" I'd never thought, I didn't realise. And he says, yeah, you'll be fine. So we stayed that night, and next morning I limped back in one cylinder with Boris 178 miles to Vancouver. It's quite a tough bike, Boris. So and we get back to the local BMW store, where they were brilliant because they're very busy, but the situation that we were in, they just helped us. We stayed the night and they worked on it all day, and then we were able to leave the next night after that. But this is Rory, the kind of crazy mechanic, and he was absolutely delighted to see that I'd actually even sheared a bit of metal under my cover. There'd been a bit of metal sheared off, so he was extremely impressed at the bike, and I get back to Vancouver. So yeah, more new indicators and a new cover, etc. And we're on our way again. I was really mad with the Canadian government because I was convinced that I was saying, there was no signs, there was nothing to say that we should slow down. And it was a wooden bridge. And I still think wooden bridges shouldn't be there. I think that's crazy, but I've got to concede that the Canadian government did have signs, and 20 kilometres an hour means 12 miles an hour over that bridge. And I've got to admit, I wasn't doing 12 miles an hour, so I can't complain. So anyway, we were heading north again, which was a good feeling. And the picture up to the left here is the house, the aunt's house of Kevin Chow. She was wonderful. Her and her husband let us camp in the grounds. They brought us in, gave us a great wholesome fish and potato dinner, and she started sewing tent patches made of tent material onto my jacket that was at that stage it was in tatters. So she was really kind, and we moved on. And this was also where we were starting to see the wildlife much more, and that's a grizzly bear to the right that I saw on the Stuart Highway, which was just amazing to see in the wild. And I was lucky to see another couple of grizzly bears after that, and bison. We saw quite a lot of them, to be honest. So up ahead of us was Raymond, and he was more ahead of us than based on us having to turn back to Vancouver. So he's maybe 5 or 6 days ahead of us, and he entered into Alaska. And so Raymond had then booked a ferry that went back down the Inner Passage to just about Seattle. So the Inner Passage is where Johnny was canoeing, the last speaker, for those that were on the last presentation. So Raymond took the ferry down there, and then he would head back to LA to ship the bike to Australia. So he was ready to turn home. But meanwhile, Wilson and I are heading up through the vast expanse of the Yukon. The top left photo is the signpost forest in Watson Lake, which is just hundreds of different signposts from all over the world, and mainly America, creating a forest. The guy on the right at the top, he was a guy that we met at a McDonald's in Whitehorse. There's only one big town in the Yukon, and we went there, and then of course we went for a McDonald's to make life easy. So Leo was the face of the Yukon Arctic Beer. That's a beer mat he's holding with his face on it, and he invited us to go down to the Yukon brewery to pick up some beer for our campsite that night. So we went in and picked up a pack of 4 beers each and come back out and went to pay, and he says, no, you don't pay, I've got free beer for life. So we're kind of disappointed he didn't tell us before, because we'd have picked up one in each hand, us being Scottish, rather than just the one. And the photo at the bottom is Dawson City and the Yukon River. So we went to the old famous mining town of Dawson City, and the campsite was across the Yukon River, which was in spate at that time and flowing very fast. So Wilson and I were both sitting in our bikes, crossing in the ferry, feeling quite relaxed. But when the captain got to the other side, he hit the bank, and it knocked us flat on the floor. So the bikes and I were sprawled across the ferry floor, probably about 3 minutes after this photo was taken, but thankfully no harm done. So from Dawson City, there was a road, a dirt road called, or a gravel road called the Top of the World Highway, which took us up to the most northerly point of Alaska in terms of the entrance into Alaska from Canada, a place called Poker Creek. So we went over and we finally made it into Alaska. And Alaska, I don't know if there's any Alaskan people on, I can't imagine there is, but there was at the last speak. But anyway, the first place that you came to was the town of Chicken, and that kind of just sums up Alaska for me. It was a wonderful but crazy place. The next town where I fueled up, I pulled in and I was filling up my tank when a lady with a couple of dogs was blaspheming and shouting and swearing and going crazy at these dogs, and I was kind of keeping my head down and thinking, okay. And then suddenly she caught me at the corner of her eye, and she turned around to me and said, "Are you visiting?" Shouting at me. And I says, "Yeah." And she says, "Well, welcome to Alaska." And I just thought it just sums up Alaska. It made me smile. So anyway, from there we went up to the city of Fairbanks. There's kind of two cities in Alaska, and Fairbanks being the smaller one up north. And we spent a couple of days up there getting ourselves ready. Wilson got new brake pads fitted to his bike. We did some oil changes and stuff. And it was while we were in Fairbanks that we learned that the ultimate destination of Prudhoe Bay was closed off because the highway had been flooded, and it was definitely not going to be open for the next maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So I think with a bit of trip fatigue and combining with the fact we couldn't get there, Wilson decided that he would move in his flight by a week, and he would take he would come up with me to the Arctic Circle, but then he would head back down and take the same Inner Passage ferry down to Seattle and fly home from Vancouver, which was good. So that was our next plan then. So north of Fairbanks, we got to the famous James W. Dalton Highway, which you might know as the Ice Road Truckers Highway. And so we got to that. It was an old gravel highway. It was to support an oil pipeline. There's now a bit of tarmac on it as well, but still mainly gravel. And we got ourselves finally up to the Arctic Circle, which was a great feeling and a great milestone in our bikes. And then we both rode another 70 miles further north, roughly 70 miles up to Coldfoot, which was a Camp Coldfoot. It's kind of the next place before Prudhoe Bay, or the next place of any size. There was a hotel there that was wanting to charge us $200, so we camped out in the permafrost for free, and we had a few beers that night to say bye-bye. And the next morning, Wilson was heading south and I was still heading north. I talked about the Dalton. So the tarmac bits were obviously okay, and the gravel was fairly good gravel. The scary bit about the gravel was if anything went wrong, you were so remote. But coming down the road, Wilson had dropped his bike twice on this stuff here, which is a chemical that they put over the gravel intermittently, and it dampens the dust. But when it's laid fresh like that, it's like an ice rink. And I got some of it further north, but obviously not as much as this. So yeah, there were definitely dangers in the Dalton. So that morning I started to head up. So I knew I had roughly 300 miles to do of a round trip, and I knew my tank wouldn't last that long. So I was going to, I stole Wilson's black petrol can, and I filled my petrol cans in his petrol can, and headed up looking to do the round trip. And that's and the one on the left-hand side, top left-hand side, you can see the Brooks mountain range, which thankfully was okay. You can see the snow at the side of the road, but the road was clear. And I did some refilling as I went along. And I finally got to the trail's end, the road closure sign in Happy Valley. And ironically, they called it Happy Valley because they were really struggling to get workers to come in and work in the oil pipeline because of the bleakness of the place. So they renamed it to try and encourage workers to come and give the impression that it was a nice place. And I stopped at that road closed sign, and I must admit, I contemplated maybe for 5 minutes about could I keep going, because to be honest, I've went through a couple of road closed signs in the Highlands before in this bike, and you kind of just get there. But I knew that if I didn't get there, then I would run out of fuel, and also I could be in deep trouble for just going. So thankfully I didn't go. And when you see the size of the flood, I'm very, very thankful I didn't go, because it would have been a total disaster. Effectively, the sea has engulfed the road. So that was as far north as I could get, and it was time to head south. So my ride south was another 2,500 miles, which was, quite a bit to get back to Vancouver. It was effectively like riding from Glasgow to Athens in Greece, and just wonderful sights going down there. You can see the glaciers and stuff. The little sign there is when I camped in Whistler in the Rocky Mountains, just not far from Vancouver. I went to the toilet and seen that there was a sign saying grizzly bears are actively hunting elk in the campground, which you don't often see. You don't see that in Applecross or anything. And I did. I'm an early riser, and I got up, and just as the gloaming, as the light was coming through, I got up out my tent that next morning, and there was a herd of elk coming streaming past my tent, almost in a ghostly fashion, and I was straight back into my tent. I've never got back into my tent so quickly, because I certainly didn't want to see if there was anything following them. But I made it south. I made it to Vancouver. I stayed one night with Kevin Chow, the guy that we'd met in the campsite, and then I got the bike into transit and got myself back home. This is the Facebook groups I talked about, the Long Way Up Pan American. If you're interested in getting any further details on it. And I did another solo around the world trip after this, and that's the Once Around the Block by Motorcycle, if you're interested in that. I've written 3 small books, and I'm very keen to say I'm a biker who writes, not a writer who bikes. So that kind of expresses my talent around it. It's my stories. I quite enjoy writing them. The Kindle versions are less than a couple of Starbucks coffee if you're interested. Otherwise, no problem. And that's it. So thank you for listening. Apologies for the technical blip at the beginning, and hope that was okay.
Yeah, that was terrific. Thanks, Steve. That was what an amazing trip and a terrific adventure. And it seems had everything, didn't it? They had bits of glamour, bits of excitement, a lot of sort of hard endeavor and hard cycling, and some fairly hairy moments. Which I guess you can look back on now, and I think of the incidents in Peru as being all quite a good experience to have. But at the time, when you're not certain about what's going on and where it's going to get to, it would have been a bit, a lot of anxiety there, I should think.
Yeah, definitely.
Just a couple of questions to start with. I mean, one of the things would be good to know about the weather extremes you had. When you were, a lot of your photos, you've got lovely blue skies, and it looks as though it's fabulously warm. But in terms of just the temperatures you're at, when you started in the down in Punta Arenas, and there had been there late summer, but sort of what kind of temperatures did you go through on the trip? What extremes? What was sort of the hottest and coldest? And
I think it worked out really well for us. So it could, at times in the central area, it was really hot, but it was never really cold.
Right.
So it probably didn't get down below, 18 degrees or something, or 16 degrees. But then, we'd be 30 odd degrees in the extreme stuff. But I think that our timing was pretty lucky, and we didn't get an awful lot of storms, an awful lot of rain. So we were pretty fortunate with the weather.
Yeah, it seemed to be, good weather. And in terms of sort of camping, how comfortable was that? Were there, insects and other stuff that would make it uncomfortable for camping? Or
no, I mean the uncomfortable thing, and amazingly, where you wouldn't expect it to be busy, the Argentinian and Chilean campsites were often very busy. I don't know if it was a holiday time of year or something, so we'd often be crammed in, and often they'd play really loud music. So that was the only kind of thing that was uncomfortable about it. And the one up in when we got up into Alaska, we could hear wolves howling when we were camping. So that was good, though. It was quite exciting. And we were always, if you went into a Canadian campsite, a formal one, they would always ask you if you were bear aware, and they would tell you we've got a mother and cubs and stuff. So you're kind of aware of it, but people were fairly chilled about it. But we were careful.
Yeah, I noticed. I was thinking about mosquitoes. Often, up in you hear about them in Canada and Alaska, and
the black flies and stuff. We were lucky. We're just before that time, so it was cold enough not to up there not to have them.
Yeah, I got guy Andrew Miller is just wondering whether do you think you could do it on a Harley Davidson? Is the question he's asking.
Well, I could maybe do it in his Harley Davidson if he wants to give me wants to be letting me borrow it. It'd be good.
Yeah, a bit of Easy Rider stuff there. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you went through some incredible variety of places. I mean, do you have any favorite? I mean, it's difficult this really, but have any favorite places? You know, if you could only go back to two places that you went to on a trip, where would they be?
I think Patagonia and Alaska. So the extreme south, the extreme north were
Really?
favourite places. Yeah, because they were just wild. There was in the beautiful scenery, blessed people.
Okay.
And the Yukon in Canada was beautiful. I mean, as you said, I mean, you could pick an awful lot of places, but yeah, the two extremes were great.
And in terms of the kind of interesting when you said about the variety within South America, I guess Chile and Argentina have maybe got more of a European influences than Bolivia and Colombia, which are much more sort of pre-Spanish, bigger Inca population, Quechua Indian populations and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Noticeable in terms of.
Yeah, it was very noticeable. I mean, you definitely you were moving. There was a big move when you moved out of Chile.
Yeah.
And into Bolivia, and Peru was more of the same, So.
Okay. Someone's asking the whiskey. What's the dream bike for doing a road trip? Do you think? I mean, did you have the dream bike, or would if you had unlimited, what would you get?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of debate about that in terms of a lot of people would say that the bikes we had were too big and too heavy, and in some cases, yeah, you'd have been a lot better off with a lighter bike. But when I talked about the Patagonia winds, I was glad they were big and heavy. But for me, these bikes for the trip we did and the type of terrain that we were on were pretty ideal because you had that long range comfort thing going on as well. So, but if you can make these trips even more narrowly, and if you did that, then you're probably better in a smaller bike.
Okay. And how long would you ride for each day? You know, was there a sort of set pattern and a routine to your day, or was it just depending on how you felt? You know, whether you 8 in the morning or 11 in the morning.
Yeah, so the only hotels we had booked were Buenos Aires and LA, and then at the end, in fact, we hadn't even booked the Vancouver one. So it was very much we kind of looked at where we were, we picked a target, and then we'd start to look for accommodation, on our phones and just gradually go there. And it could vary from 100 miles to 200 miles, just depending where you were. In America, it could be a bit further than that.
And did you get a sort of a sense of seeing and getting to know the places you were passing through? I mean, a lot of the time you'd need to keep moving on, but there must have been also times when you wanted to stop, and you obviously met local folks that would have been fascinating and get a sort of a feel for the place you were traveling through.
Yeah, we did, but I mean, you could quite a few people are doing this. Would maybe take a year to do the same journey. So it's and as I said, we were looking at 3 months, and then we really would have struggled. So, but we did get a great flavour, and I mean, we're stopping off. We weren't just riding all day. We were stopping off and visiting places and stuff like that. So we got a good feel for it. But you could do more. You could spend a lot of time in every country.
And obviously, there were times when you were the attraction, so people came to sort of in a good way of interacting with locals and getting a sort of a feel for it. And you obviously did meet some really interesting people. Have you kept in touch with anybody? I mean, was it Herman that you met? And
yeah. We've been in touch. Yeah, he's back in El Salvador now, so he's not living in Miami anymore. So stay in touch. And so there's a few guys. We met some guys in Mexico that have been in touch. The guy Kevin Chow who helped us out, he's living with his girlfriend in Australia now, and he's totally in touch. So you do build up this little network. There's a guy in Switzerland who's been messaging me recently. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's nice. That is nice.
Yeah, so it continues the kind of the
Yeah,
experience, isn't it?
yeah.
Archie Lang's asking about the spare tires that you have. You had quite a lot to start with. Did you use them all up?
Yeah, I was wondering if somebody might have noticed that. So we went with spare tires on the back, and we changed them in Mendoza, and we had a decision to make because they were quite bulky in the back. You know, it's just that they're quite bulky things to have. They were weighing the back of the bikes down. So when we did our first tire change, we decided not to take the other tires with us, which of course would have been a fantastic thing to do for Bolivia for my puncture. But
Yeah.
we'd spare tires until our first tire change, and then we were riding just in the tires that we had.
Okay. And did you have any? I mean, it seemed to me that the mechanical problems you have with the bikes were all due to crashes and smashes.
Yes.
Were there any mechanical failings that just through the dust and the dirt and the wear and tear, or was it just?
Yeah, no, well, the Raymond's bike had an issue down in, I think it was in Chile we were in quite early. There was an engine management light come on, and we FaceTimed the guy, the Stevie Cowan BMW guy, and he told us to turn a couple of screws, and it went off. So, which was it's a great way to do it.
Yeah.
The other damage was things. Well, I think mainly my bike. Things fell off it. You know, there's a kind of mudguard thing at the back that just get torn off with the gravel roads.
Yeah.
I had a little extra windscreen that come flying off when we were in that storm in Bolivia. So,
Yeah.
but other than that, no, mechanically they were amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a hell of a trip for them to hold up on
Yeah,
through incredibly varied conditions. Yeah, so that's
yeah,
a testimony to the bikes, isn't it?
yeah, definitely.
And I was interested when you discovered you'd gone across the equator. I mean, did you stop and do any of the little tricks? Balance an egg on the top of a pin, or
We didn't know. No, I should have thought of that. But no, we were so struggling to find the equator because I thought there would be, visitor centres and stuff like that. But apparently not in the road we were on. So we
no?
actually passed that sign, and Raymond was looking at his sat nav, the coordinates, and he's saying we're past it. So we followed the coordinates of the sat nav and then found that sign. And
Okay.
again, it was like, I mean, it wasn't a car park or anything. We're sitting in the road. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I was lucky enough to go to Ecuador a few years ago, and there were three different equators that we got to just outside Quito. There was
all right.
there's the original historic one, and then there
Uh-huh.
was the GPS one, and then
Hmm.
there was it's a bit like sort of going to Loch Ness, and there's the
Right.
original Loch Ness monster, and there's the
Uh-huh.
official Loch Ness monster. So you
Yeah.
never knew quite which
I'm never
equator,
sure. Yeah.
which was the right one. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's good stuff. I mean, yeah. So the the obvious question, and I think it's yeah, we've got a number of folks just saying thanks for the talk, and it was really inspirational, and that it was a trip they'd love to do. But the obvious question that come at this stage of the evening is, do you have plans for the next trip?
Well, there's always things bubbling under. So I did a trip after that one, which was going from Ardermachen Point to Vladivostok in the Sea of Japan, and
Yeah,
then I went from San Francisco to Boston. So that was kind of around the world one, which was another trip. But beyond that, yeah, we're probably maybe try and do something more European, something more local next. Once I get my bike back.
right. Yeah, because yeah, you told me where your bike is now. It's
Well, the bike's in Boston in America because the plan was to go and get it up to Canada and get it shipped over, but COVID has completely stopped that. So,
so it's
it's in a friend's garage in Boston in America.
okay. So is that that's the end of your last trip? Is it?
Yes, yeah,
Not back since then. So
yeah.
how long was that trip? How long did it take you to do that one around
That
the?
was I did it in two parts because I was working at the time and I get leave of absences. So I took, I think it was 6 or 7 weeks to get to Vladivostok, and then 5 weeks from San Francisco to Boston. But
Right.
I split it into 2 years.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
incredible. It sounds like
yeah,
another talk for another day.
yeah,
That's brilliant. It's been a fantastic evening, and it's been tremendous just to go through so many different cultures and climates and geographies in that trip. I mean, it is literally, isn't it, from one end of the world to the
yeah.
other.
Nice.
That's yeah, it's an incredible experience. So it's brilliant that you shared it with us tonight. So
Okay.
thank you so much, Steve, for doing that.
And let me make it clear, the technical problems at the start were all my fault. So apologies.
No, don't worry about that. It's it just continues the tradition of every talk we've had so far. We've had a technical problem, but it was all right on the night, as they say.
Okay, thank you.
That's great. So thanks a lot, and thanks also to Graham behind the scenes for producing these events. That's been really good. And thanks everybody for watching tonight and sticking with the hiccups at the beginning. I hope you have enjoyed it. It was a fantastic talk from Steve. And if you do feel inclined to make a small donation to the community hall here, then the GoFundMe page details have just popped up on the screen now, so that would be much appreciated. Our next event is 2 weeks tonight, when we've got Adele Pennington, who is probably one of the world's best high altitude climbers. I think Graham was talking about her earlier on in the evening, that she's done a number of the 8,000 meter peaks. She's been up Everest a couple of times, and is very proficient climber and instructor. So we're really chuffed that Adele has agreed to do a talk for us in 2 weeks' time, and I'll send out some more details about that in the next day or so. But I really hope that you can join us in a fortnight's time. But for tonight, thanks for being with us, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And really good to see you, and hope to see you in 2 weeks from now. So thanks a lot, and good night.